Hello everyone, this is Blue Moon's Light, and I was requested to read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and I'm so sorry I cannot recall the screen name of the person who had asked, so I will fulfill that request, and I'll make a note in the info box below of who had requested it. Now, I took the book out of my local library and I've read through the chapters, and I'm going to skip the first chapter because I found it to be very long and tedious. All it explains is the sighting of a sea monster which stirred up global news and the local seafaring folk, and so I'm just going to skip that and go right to chapter 2. And it's called The Pros and Cons. Now, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was written by Jules Verne, and it is public domain, I believe. So let me get into this, and I hope you enjoy. When these events took place, I was on my way back from a scientific expedition to the Badlands of Nebraska in the United States. The French government had asked me to join this expedition because of my position as assistant professor at the Museum of Natural History in Paris. After spending 6 months in Nebraska, I finally arrived in New York toward the end of March, laden down with the many precious things I had collected there. I was to leave for France in the beginning of May. In the meanwhile, I was busy classifying my mineralogical, botanical, and zoological treasures. It was then that the incident of the Scotia took place. I was well informed on this much discussed subject, and in fact, how could I not have been? I had read and reread all the American and European newspapers without getting any nearer to a conclusion. This mystery intrigued me. I was unable to form any opinion about it, and drifted from one extreme to the other. That something had actually taken place, there could be no question. Doubting Thomases were invited to touch the Scotia's wound. During my stay in New York, the question was at its height. The theory that it was a floating island or an elusive reef, upheld by many people not competent to judge, had been completely abandoned. For unless this reef contained a motor, how could it move from one place to another without such prodigious speed? Likewise, the theory of the floating wreckage of some huge ship was rejected also because of its rapidity of movement. There, therefore, remained only 2 possible solutions to the problem, and each one developed its own group of partisans. On the one hand, there were those who claimed it must be a monster of colossal strength, and on the other hand, there were those who held it to be a submarine with extremely powerful engines. But this second theory, perhaps the most plausible, could not stand up against the inquiries being carried out both in Europe and America. It seemed highly improbable that a private individual could have such a mechanical device at his disposition. How and when could he have built it? And how could he have kept its construction a secret? Only a government could possess such a weapon of destruction. And in these disastrous times, when man's genius is being put to work increasing the power of weapons, some country might have tried to build such a formidable device. After the chase-pot rifles, torpedoes, after the torpedoes, underwater battering rams, and then the reaction. At least, so I hope. But the theory that it was some war machine fell through before the statements of various governments, since it was a matter of public interest with the safety of transoceanic communications in question. There was no reason to doubt the honesty of their statements. And, in addition, how could anyone imagine that the construction of such a submarine could have escaped public notice? To keep a secret under such circumstances is very difficult for an individual, and surely impossible for a country whose every act is constantly watched by powerful rivals. Therefore, after inquiries made in England, France, Russia, Prussia, Spain, Italy, America, and even Turkey, the theory of an underwater monitor was definitely rejected. So, once again, and in spite of the incessant jokes in lesser newspapers, everyone was talking about the monster, and people were soon inventing creatures more absurd than the wildest dreams of some mad ichthyologist. During my stay in New York, several people had done me the honor of consulting me on this matter. In France, I had published a 2-volume work in quarto called The Mysteries of the Ocean Depths. This book had been especially well received by scientists and had therefore made me a specialist in this rather obscure branch of natural history. People wanted to know my opinion. As long as the facts could still be denied, I confined myself to complete skepticism. But I soon found myself driven into a corner and forced to explain in no uncertain terms, and finally, the Honorable Pierre Aronnax, professor of the Paris Museum, was called upon by the New York Herald to formulate some sort of opinion. I complied. I spoke because I could not remain silent. I discussed the problem from every angle, both political and scientific, and I give here an extract of my carefully written article published in that newspaper on April 30th. After examining one by one all the various solutions that had been proposed, I said, "Therefore, since all the other theories must be rejected, one is forced to admit the existence of some marine animal of extraordinary power. We know nothing about the great ocean depths. Soundings have been unable to reach them. What takes place in those remote canyons? What creatures live or can live 12 or 15 miles below the surface? How are such animals built? We can scarcely even guess. These questions go hand in hand with the problem under discussion, for either we know all of the varieties of creatures which inhabit our planet, or we do not. If we do not know them all, if nature still holds some secrets for us where life in the sea is concerned, then nothing could be more reasonable than to admit the existence of fish or whales of a kind unknown to us, especially built to inhabit the unfathomable depths of the ocean, and which some event, whim or desire brings to the surface at long intervals of time. If, on the contrary, we know all species of living things, we must try to find the animal in question among the marine creatures already classified, and in this case I would favor admitting the existence of a giant narwhal. The ordinary narwhal, or unicorn fish, is a kind of whale which grows to a length of 60 feet. Multiply this by 5 or 10 times, give this fish strength in proportion to its size, and you will have the animal under discussion. It would have the proportions observed by the officers of the Shannon, the weapon required to explain the hole in the Scotia, and the strength needed to penetrate the hull of a steamer. For the narwhal is armed with a kind of ivory sword, or halberd, as some naturalists put it. It is a tusk as hard as steel. Occasionally these tusks are found embedded in the bodies of other kinds of whales, against which the narwhal always wins. Others have been removed, not without difficulty, from the hulls of ships which they had pierced clean through as easily as drill pierces a barrel. The museum in the Faculty of Medicine in Paris owns one of these tusks, 7 feet 4.5 inches long and 19 inches thick at the base. Now imagine this weapon 10 times larger and the fish 10 times stronger. Imagine it traveling at a speed of 20 miles an hour. Multiply the speed by its mass, and you will have below a capable of producing the required catastrophe. Therefore, until I receive fuller information, I shall be of the opinion that it is a unicorn fish of colossal proportions, armed not with a halberd, but with a real battering ram like a warship, which it could equal in both size and strength. This might be the explanation of this unexplainable phenomenon, unless it is an illusion in spite of what has been glimpsed, seen, felt, and experienced, which is still possible. These last words were cowardice on my part, but to a certain degree I wanted to protect my scholarly reputation and not be the laughing-stock of America, where people enjoy a hearty laugh. I left myself a way out, but in effect I admitted to the existence of the monster. My article was hotly discussed and therefore became widely known. The solution it proposed, moreover, gave free rein to people's imaginations. The human mind enjoys grandiose ideas about supernatural creatures, and the sea is the proper medium for such ideas, for only there can giants arise and develop, giants alongside which earthly animals such as elephants and rhinoceros are nothing but dwarfs. The seas support the largest known species of mammals, and they perhaps conceal mollusks of incredible size, or terrifying crustaceans such as lobsters 100 yards long, or crabs weighing 2 tons. Why not? Long ago in geological times, earthbound animals, quadrupeds, quadrumana, reptiles, and birds all produced species of gigantic size. The Creator had formed them in a colossal mold which time had reduced little by little. Why could the sea, with its unknown depths, not have kept some vast specimens of life in another age, since, unlike the earth's shell, which is constantly being altered, it is unchanging? Why could it not hide in its bosom the last survivors of titanic species for whom years are centuries and centuries millennia? But I am letting myself be carried away by reveries which I must now put aside. Enough of these fantasies which time has changed for me into terrible realities. But back then, people had already made up their minds about this matter, and the public wholeheartedly believed in the existence of some prodigious creature which had nothing in common with fabled sea serpents. But although some saw it as a purely scientific problem, others, especially the more practical-minded people in America and England, thought it best to clear the ocean of this terrible monster in order to make transatlantic travel safe again. Industrial and commercial newspapers considered the question principally from the point of view. The Shipping and Mercantile Gazette, the Lloyd, the Paquebot, the Revue Maritime et Coloniale, and all the periodicals concerned with insurance companies who threatened to raise their rates were unanimous on this point. One public opinion had made itself felt. The United States was the first country to go into action. A very fast frigate, the Abraham Lincoln, got ready to put to sea as soon as possible. The shipyards were thrown open to Commander Farragut, who had his ship fitted out with great speed and efficiency. But then, as always happens, just when it had been decided to chase the monster, it did not reappear. For 2 months it was not heard of. No ship sighted it. It seemed as if this unicorn fish knew about the plots being hatched against it. There had been so much discussion about it, and even over the transatlantic cable. Some jokers pretended that this sly creature had intercepted some telegram and was making use of the information it contained. The frigate was therefore prepared for a long campaign and equipped with formidable fishing gear. But nobody knew where to send it, and everyone was growing more impatient when, on July 2nd, it was learned that a steamer of the line that plies between San Francisco and Shanghai had seen the animal 3 weeks earlier in northern Pacific waters. This piece of news caused great excitement. Commander Farragut was ordered to set sail within 24 hours. The ship was stocked with food and its coal bunkers filled to the brim. Not a single man was missing for the ship's roll call. All that remained to be done was to light its furnaces, heat its boilers, and weigh anchor. Another half-day's delay would have been unforgivable, but then Commander Farragut asked nothing better than to be underway. 3 hours before the Abraham Lincoln was due to leave its pier in Brooklyn, I received the following letter. Mr. Arenal, Professor of the Paris Museum, 5th Avenue Hotel, New York. Dear Sir, if you would like to join the expedition of the Abraham Lincoln, the government of the Union would take great pleasure in having you represent France on this enterprise. Commander Farragut has a cabin at your disposal. Very cordially yours, J.B. Hobson, Secretary of the Navy. Chapter 2. As Monsieur wishes. 3 seconds before the arrival of J.B. Hobson's letter, I had no more thought about chasing the unicorn fish than I had about trying to find the Northwest Passage. 3 seconds after reading a letter from the Honorable Secretary of the Navy, I realized that my true vocation, my sole aspiration, was to chase this disturbing monster and rid the world of it. But I had just come back from a long trip. I was tired and longing for rest. I had had only one desire, to return to my country, my friends, my little apartment near the botanical gardens, and my precious collections. But nothing could keep me back. I forgot everything, weariness, friends, and collections, and without a second thought I accepted the American government's offer. Besides, I thought, all roads lead back to Europe, and maybe the unicorn fish will be kind enough to lure me toward the coasts of France. This worthy animal will let himself be caught in European waters as a personal favor to me, and then I'll bring back no less than 1.5 feet of his ivory tusk for the Museum of Natural History. But, in the meantime, we had to look for this narwhal in the North Pacific, which meant going to France by the way of antipodes. Conseil! I cried impatiently. Conseil was my servant, a devoted young man who followed me on all of my trips, a brave Belgian whom I liked and who liked me. He was impassive by nature, of regular habits as a matter of principle, eager out of habit, scarcely ever taken aback by life's surprises. Very clever with his hands, fit for any kind of servants, and the sort of person who, in spite of having a name meaning advice, never gave any, even when asked. As a result of rubbing elbows with the little group of scientists attached to the botanical gardens, Conseil had picked up quite a bit of knowledge. In him I had well-informed specialist in natural history classification, who could, with an acrobat's ease, rush up and down the ladder of phyla, divisions, classes, subclasses, orders, families, genera, subgenera, species, and varieties. But his knowledge ended there. His whole life was classification, and he knew nothing else. He was very well read in the theory of classification, but knew little about the practical side, to the point where I don't think he could have told the difference between a sperm whale and an ordinary whale. But in spite of this, he was a fine young man. For 10 years now, Conseil had followed me everywhere science had led me. Never a murmur about the length or weariness of a trip. Never an objection to packing his suitcase for some new country, China or the Congo, no matter how long, how far off it was. He could go anywhere without a question. Moreover, his strong constitution defied all illness. He had powerful muscles, but no nerves, or at least he gave no appearance of having any. He was 30, and his age was to his masters as 15 as to 20. Please excuse me for thus stating that I was 40 years old. But Conseil had one defect. Being of a very formal nature, he only addressed me in the third person, to the point where it was annoying. Conseil, I repeated, as I feverishly began my preparations for leaving. I felt completely sure of this young man's devotion. I usually never asked him whether or not he would like to accompany me on my travels, but this time it was a question of an expedition that can go on indefinitely, of a dangerous enterprise in pursuit of an animal capable of sinking a frigate as if it were a nutshell. This was food for thought, even for the most impassive man in the world. What would he say? "Conseil!" I shouted a third time. Conseil appeared. "Monsieur was calling?" he said as he entered. "Yes, my boy. Get our things together, mine and yours. We're leaving in 2 hours. "As monsieur wishes," Conseil answered calmly. "There's not a moment to lose. Pack all my traveling equipment, and as many suits, shirts, and socks as you can. And hurry. And monsieur's collection? We'll take care of that later." "What?" The Archaeotherium, the Hyracotherium, Creodons, Cheopomatus, and the other specimens monsieur collected. They'll keep them for us at the hotel. And monsieur's live babirusa? They'll feed it while we're away. Besides, I'll have our menagerie sent to France after we leave." "That means we're not going back to Paris?" "Yes. Don't worry," I answered evasively. "Only by a rather roundabout way." "Whatever roundabout way monsieur wishes." "Oh, it won't be too long. Just not quite as direct, that's all. We're taking passage on the Abraham Lincoln." "Whatever suits monsieur," replied Conseil calmly. "You know, my friend, that it has to do with the monster, the famous narwhal. We're going to rid the seas of this animal. The author of a 2-volume work in quarto on the mysteries of the ocean depths cannot turn down an invitation to go with Commander Farragut. It is a glorious mission, but also dangerous. No one knows where it will take us. These creatures can be full of strange whims, but we'll go all the same. We have a commander who will stop at nothing." "Wherever monsieur goes, I'll go too," answered Conseil. "But think it over. I want to be completely frank with you. People don't always come back from expeditions such as these." "As monsieur wishes." A quarter of an hour later, our trunks were ready. Conseil had done everything in the twinkling of an eye, and I could be sure nothing was missing, for he classified shirts and suits just as carefully as he did birds and mammals. The elevator left us in the big mezzanine lounge. I went down the stairs leading to the lobby. I paid my bill at the huge reception desk, which was always crowded with people. I left orders to have my cases of stuffed animals and dried plants sent to Paris. I opened an account large enough to take care of the Barbarossa, and with Conseil right behind, jumped into a carriage. This cab, which charged $4 a trip, went down Broadway to Union Square, followed 4th Avenue to its junction with the Bowery, then took Katrin Street and stopped at Pier 34. There, the Katrin ferry took everything, men, horses, and carriage, to Brooklyn, the great annex of New York situated on the other side of the East River, and in several minutes we arrived on the wharf alongside which the Abraham Lincoln was belching forth columns of black smoke through its 2 funnels. Our baggage was immediately transferred to the deck of the frigate. I rushed aboard and asked for the Commander Farragut. One of the soldiers led me to the poop, where I found myself in the presence of a handsome officer who stretched out his hand to me. "Mr. Pierre Arnault," he said. "Yes," I answered. "Commander Farragut, in person. Welcome aboard, Professor. Your cabin is ready." I bowed, and, leaving the commander to take care of his preparations, I had myself taken to my cabin. The Abraham Lincoln had been perfectly chosen and fitted out for its new task, and it was a very fast frigate with superheating equipment permitting it to build up as much as 7 atmospheres of steam pressure. Under these conditions, the Abraham Lincoln could attain a speed of 18.3 knots, which, although considerable, was nevertheless not enough to grapple with the gigantic creature we were after. The way it was fitted out inside corresponded favorably with its nautical qualities. I was very pleased with my cabin, which had a door leading to the officers' mess. "We'll be very comfortable here," I said to Conseil. If Monsieur doesn't mind my saying so, answered Conseil, as comfortable as a hermit crab in the shell of a whelk. I left Conseil to secure our trunks and went back on deck to watch the preparations for departure. Just then, Commander Fetticoat was ordering to cast off the last rope mooring the Abraham Lincoln to its Brooklyn pier. That meant that if I had been a quarter of an hour late, or even less, the frigate would have left without me, and I would have missed out on this extraordinary, strange, and improbable expedition, a true account which might well meet with some skepticism. But Commander Farragut did not want to lose a single moment setting out for those waters where the animal had been sighted. He called for his engineer. "Is the pressure up?" he asked. "Yes, sir," answered the engineer. "Go ahead," cried Commander Farragut. At this order, transmitted to the engine room by means of a compressed air device, the mechanics put the starting wheel into motion. The steam whistled through the half-open valves. The long horizontal pistons groaned and pushed the rods and drive shaft. The blades of the propeller struck the water with an increasing speed, and the Abraham Lincoln pushed forward amid an escort of 100 ferry boats and tenders filled with spectators. The Brooklyn and Manhattan wharves lining the East River were filled with people. 3 hurrahs rising from 500,000 chests burst out one after the other. Thousands of handkerchiefs waved above the compact mass of the crowd, saluting the Abraham Lincoln till it reached the waters of the Hudson, at the tip of the elongated peninsula which contains the city of New York. Then the frigate followed the New Jersey shore lined with villas and passed by the forts which saluted it with their largest cannon. The Abraham Lincoln answered by 3 times lowering and raising the American flag, whose 39 stars shone on the mizzen-mast. Then, slowing down in order to pass through the channel marked by buoys, it passed Sandy Hook, where thousands of spectators cheered it once again. The escort of boats and tenders did not leave the frigate until she reached the lightship whose 2 beacons marked the entrance to New York harbor. It was then 3 o'clock, and the pilot got into his dinghy and rowed over to the little schooner waiting for him to leeward. The fires were stoked up, and the propeller turned faster in the water. The frigate skirted the long, yellow coast of Long Island, and at 8 in the evening, after losing sight of Fire Island in the northwest, it ran at full steam toward the dark waters of the Atlantic. I'll leave you here. This is quite a very thick book, and I do thank you for joining me on this journey. I've never read this story before, so it's as new to me as it is to those of you who haven't read it before either. I do apologize for mispronouncing words. My American tongue is very stubborn. But thank you again, one of my viewers, for recommending this request, and I'll pick up again in a couple days with the next couple of chapters. Good night.